Well, hello and welcome back to Walking the Talk, the sermon podcast of Creekside Community Church in San Leandro, California, where we help you to live out what we talked about on Sunday. My name is Jeff Bruce. I'm one of the pastors here. I'm joined by two men who need no introduction. Men, how you doing?
Fine.
Could you remind us who we are just in case we forget?
Max Butler, pastor of worship. My father, John Bruce, founding pastor of Creekside Community Church. That's who you are if you needed reminding. Listeners, if you needed reminding. Gentlemen, how are you?
We're good.
Doing great.
Good.
Are you confident Max is good? You just spoke for him.
I did.
Yeah.
I did, because we're all one in the spirit, right?
That's good.
So
Okay.
I know what's going on with Max.
So yeah, that's good. Scale of 1 to 10, confidence check here. Warriors, where are you at?
Well, they have as good a chance as anybody else, I think. I mean,
Bold takes here.
nobody is Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And so I think everybody else in that next level are all can either win or lose, depending on how the game goes. So I'm not sure they can beat Oklahoma, but I think they can beat anybody else.
I think they can beat Oklahoma. I don't know if they can beat the Lakers or the Nuggets.
I think they are vulnerable.
They just did.
They just did.
Once. They've already beat OKC twice.
No, they have to do it once at a time.
It's true. One day at a time.
Yeah.
One game at a time.
Yeah.
Well, today we are in the end of Luke 22, beginning of Luke 23, as we are rounding home here in our series on Luke. Let's look first at Peter's denial and Jesus' confession at the end of Luke 22, starting in verse 54. Luke says this: Then they seized Jesus and led him away, bringing him into the high priest's house, and Peter was following at a distance. And when they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat down among them. Then a servant girl, seeing him as he sat in the light and looking closely at him, said, This man also was with him. But he denied it, saying, Woman, I do not know him. And a little later, someone else saw him and said, You also are one of them. But Peter said, Man, I am not. And after an interval of about an hour, still another insisted, saying, Certainly this man was also with him, for he too is a Galilean. But Peter said, Man, I do not know what you are talking about. And immediately, while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter. And Peter remembered the saying of the Lord, how he had said to him, Before the rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times. And he went out and wept bitterly. Now the men who were holding Jesus in custody were mocking him as they beat him. They also blindfolded him and kept asking him, Prophesy, who is it that struck you? And they said many other things against him, blaspheming him. When day came, the assembly of the elders of the people gathered together, both chief priests and scribes, and they led him away to their council, and they said, If you are the Christ, tell us. But he said to them, If I tell you, you will not believe. And if I ask you, you will not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man shall be seated at the right hand of the power of God. So they all said, Are you the Son of God then? And he said to them, You say that I am. Then they said, What further testimony do we need? We have heard it ourselves from his own lips. Great compare and contrast in this passage between Peter and Jesus.
Yeah.
And I think that's intentional that they're put together to the denial and the confession here. What did you think?
Yeah, I think this reminds me of just what we just read at the last time, when Peter was so confident. He said, Everybody else may deny you, but I won't deny you. And Jesus goes to the garden to pray and says, Keep watching and praying, for the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And Jesus took the weakness of his flesh seriously, and so he devoted himself to prayer. Peter slept.
Yeah.
And so Peter goes into this thing full of confidence and ends up just decimated because he's failed Jesus completely. Jesus, on the other hand, goes into this thing fighting the battle on his knees. And so he's able to handle the battle itself once it happens around him, because so I just think it's a great illustration of what we have to do to overcome temptation.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting though because as I was preaching on this and thinking more about it and in preparation, it struck me Peter is not a timid guy.
No.
I mean, just before this, he is the one guy who's fighting to protect Jesus in front of an angry mob, and so he's not the guy that you would assume would fold under pressure. And so, what is it about this scene, getting interrogated around a fire, that causes him to fail when just before this he was so ready to fight for Jesus?
Well, one thing I noticed is that he's alone.
Yeah,
Before this was with Jesus there, his disciples were there. Um, he erroneously believed that Jesus was about to take the throne
Mhm.
of, because they all did, uh, take the throne of Israel, and so it's a hot emotional moment when this
Right.
is all happening. Here, he's more by himself. It's cooled. So
Yeah.
that's my shallow supposition of what's going on here.
Yeah, I don't think it's shallow. I think this is why Jesus was pressing upon Peter the urgency of the moment
Yeah,
to pray, because you really don't understand how Satan is about to shake you,
yeah,
what he's about to do, and how much you need God's power to endure this. And I
yeah,
think Peter couldn't have even conceived of this situation coming where Jesus would allow himself to be arrested.
yeah,
Something that struck me, and I put a note down during the talk. He also just went through this really emotional moment of like attacking a guy.
Yeah.
And so I know that after I've made a huge mistake, like I'm just kind of in shock and I'm afraid, I'm worried about the consequences of what might happen. So he might be not just fearing the association with Christ, but also just fearing that he's going to be associated with this attempted murder
Yeah.
and being thrown in jail for that. So, I mean, he's probably just trying to disassociate himself from the whole mob because
Yeah.
out of fear. I mean, that's
Hiding out from Malchus.
yeah, exactly. Just don't let that Malchus guy. Yeah, where was Malchus when this is all going down? Because no, that's the guy.
That's him. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, I think disillusionment is a lot of what is robbing Peter of his boldness here. It's
Yeah,
one thing to fight and die for your cause, but when the cause seems lost, um, uh, and I think that's true for Christians too. That
yeah,
when we lose confidence in God or what He's doing, that's when we shrink back from being bold
yeah,
and identifying with Him.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, and I think too, it's just he's realizing the limits of his fleshly strength.
Yeah.
And he's gone further than any other disciples, except maybe John.
Yeah.
We don't know, but everybody else deserted before this. He's still trying to stay close to Jesus.
Yeah.
But then when these servant girls or servant girl says, "Aren't you one of them?" It's too much. That's as far as he can take it,
Yeah.
and he just goes into the self-protecting mode, which is what gets us all. Um,
Yeah, and I think one of Luke's points here is that obviously we know Peter's going to fail, but you have to read this, I think, in the larger narrative of Acts, which is why does he fail? Well, one, he hasn't learned from Jesus how to endure this test yet.
yeah,
Jesus has got to do it first, and
yeah,
that's what he's about to do at the end of the passage.
yeah,
And the Spirit hasn't been given.
right,
And the Spirit is who gives us power to bear witness for Jesus. And Peter doesn't have that power yet.
yeah, yeah,
So, what do you notice about Jesus and the way he deals with a similar situation of being interrogated? Peter is being pressured and he decides to lie. Jesus is being pressured and he decides to tell the truth. Um, what stands out to you about this? I just commented on my own question. You're never supposed to do that. I can't stand it when people do that at interviews, and I just did it. So.
aha,
aha.
I'll point the finger at myself.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I think two things strike me about Jesus is one that he doesn't answer.
Yeah.
He says, and like Peter says in 1 Peter 2,
Yeah.
he said, while being reviled, he did not revile in return. And while being threatened, he uttered no threats, but kept entrusting himself to God who judges righteously. And that's the way I think we follow his example in many cases, that we don't have to answer. We don't have to justify ourselves. We just entrust ourselves to God and not fight back, but just trust God. And then he answers when they're about to lose the case. I mean, they have no evidence against him. He's going to walk free because they cannot, unless he condemns himself by his own words.
Yeah.
So he just quotes scripture, and that's what all they need in their interpretation. So he gives them exactly what they need. Aha, we've got you now. Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you have said so.
Yeah.
It's almost like, if that's the charge you want to bring before Caesar, go ahead.
Yeah.
That I'm the Son of God, knowing that Caesar wouldn't find that charge compelling either.
Yeah.
Because to declare that you're the Son of God, that's a Jewish title for the king. He's not saying I'm Caesar. He's saying I'm the Son of God. And it is a threat to Caesar's reign, but Caesar wouldn't interpret it that way.
Yeah.
He would just see this as some kind of internecine Jewish dispute here about their king.
Yeah. I mean, does he say son? He says Son of Man, right?
He says Son of Man, but then they ask him, are you the Son of God?
Oh,
then?"
yeah.
And I think the reason they do that is because when Jesus quotes scripture, he puts two passages together, the Son of Man passage and Psalm 110.
Yeah.
So Daniel 7 and Psalm 110,
Yeah.
he's showing that whoever the heavenly Son of Man is
The Son of God.
the Messiah, the Son of God. And so they figure that out right away because they know the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And that's enough of a charge for them.
Yeah.
Three things strike me about Jesus. One, he's just not intimidated by mockery.
No.
He just sees it for what it is.
Yeah.
And so when people start name calling or shaming, he doesn't feel any need to respond in kind.
Yeah.
There's no reason to, right? That's one. Two, we've got new background music, Dad. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Sorry. Normally you can't hear that because it comes through my ears, but my ears are in Emeryville right now, so.
You speak cryptically, Dad, in parables, and wise sayings. But three things. He doesn't respond to mockery. Two, it strikes me his boldness is not brashness. You know, when you think of bold people, sometimes you think of those who are the most outspoken or those who need to get a word in all the time. Jesus says almost nothing. He just endures and is silent. And only says, then, the third point is that only says what God wants him to say.
Yeah.
This is just what the Father has given him to say, and that's it, no more. And that really stands out to me.
I think that's a great point. Yeah, he's not reacting in anger.
No.
He is reacting in faith.
Yeah.
This is what God wants him to say. This is what he'll say, and he will say no more.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, your point about this would not hold water with the Roman governor, I don't think that matters to Jesus. I don't think what the Roman governor thinks about him is matters. But I think what matters to him is these are God's people.
Yes.
And they are fulfilling the prophecy by rejecting their Messiah, which I think was painful for Jesus, I would think. But that's what he's concerned about here.
Yeah.
The Romans are just the details.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, boldness comes out of conscience towards God.
Yeah.
And I think that's really what you see in Jesus here, is that if I'm focused on how it's going to land or what I think they'd like to hear or something like that, rather than, okay, what would please God that I can say right now? And then I'm really speaking in the sight of God, like Paul talks about.
Yeah.
And so, that doesn't mean you're brash and condescending or domineering in your conversation. That's not boldness. Boldness is saying what's needful in the moment out of response to God.
Yeah.
The thing that you said about listening to God and talk while you're listening to somebody, and when you're speaking with somebody, always pray for the words to say, and that's something that I've been really trying to apply as well. Having that double conversation.
Yeah. What's helped you two to be bold in conversations with people?
Well, I think that just asking God to give me the words in the moment that He wants me to say. I don't have the sense that God is telling me what to say. It's just that he speaks when I ask him to do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's not like it comes to my mind, oh, here's what you should say. You know, okay.
Here's the sentence.
Here's the sentence I write.
Right.
It doesn't work that way for me.
No.
It's just I say, Lord, I don't know what to say here.
Yeah.
And then it'll pop into my mind, or what I say will come. And I think that's what Jesus said. He said, when they bring you before the trials, don't worry about what you'll say, because it'll be given to you at that time what you're going to say. And that's the way it works for me.
Mm-hmm.
If my anger or my pride or any of these things get into the play of things, I always mess it up.
Yeah.
I'll say the wrong thing, or I'll not say the right thing. I'll hedge my bets. I'll try to make it more winsome, to try to make it more more clever or more acceptable, rather than just being simple and direct and saying, this is what I think.
Yeah.
I think that something I do is I try to ask more questions.
Mm-hmm.
I find that I can respond better with more information, and I can kind of listen to what they're saying, pray about what they're saying, and then something will come in. I like what you said, that trying not to make it too winsome, or trying to, and I think that that's something I succumb to a lot. I want, and it's not because I want them to like the gospel or believe the gospel. It's because I want them to like me.
Yeah.
I don't want to be rejected by this
Yeah.
person. So that's why I feel if I just say something as boldly as it needs to be said, I feel like they will reject me. And I think that's the thing I need to get over.
Yeah, often boldness is just clarity. It's not that you're trying to make a real in-your-face slam dunk comment. You're just clear, and you're overt instead of being covert
Yes.
in the way that you communicate with people. I think I like your point, though, of not game planning too much of here's how it's going to go and here's what I'm going to say, but really in the moment saying what's needful to say next, Lord.
Yeah.
Teach me that. And I think for me, I'm always looking for the way to push deeper in a conversation, which always requires a little bit of boldness. I think if you're going to really make this granular, and so you could be talking to a person, you just notice that something is bugging them in the conversation, and boldness looks like, hey, it seems like something bugs you right now. How you doing?
Yeah.
What's going on?
Yeah.
And maybe they say, no, I'm fine, or no, I'm good, or it's taking those conversations a little deeper. You're talking about parenting or something, and you ask a yet to believe friend, like, well, what do you want for your kids? Like, what would cause you to look back and say, I'm pleased with the job I did as a parent. Who do you want them to become? And that can be kind of a weird conversation, because people don't ask those kind of questions normally.
Yeah.
And I'm just trying to think of examples here of asking the deper value questions of what matters most to you.
Yeah.
And I'm always trying to get to that point with people.
Yeah.
That's what I want to see, so that I have a natural opportunity to talk about what matters most to me.
Yeah, I think that's really part of being slow to speak, quick to hear, and slow to anger. Is that by questioning, you learn so much more, and it makes such a bigger impact on the person often than having reams and reams of material you give them. And it's just, you overwhelm them, which I feel like I've done that in the past, just overwhelm them with arguments and stuff like that, which is not there, and they're not hearing past
The
the
eyes
first
begin to
sentence.
glaze.
Yeah, exactly.
One other thing about this type of thing, you're not really going to be effective just what you say, ultimately, in terms of bringing this person closer to knowing God. I mean, hopefully you would have a way of speaking into someone's life where you could ultimately invite them to be in the scripture, because I don't think anything's going to change a person until they actually start reading the word. So you might be able to say a passage, and you might be able to, it might have an impact on them, but until they actually open up the word and start reading it, anything we say is not going to have the impact that the desire that we want.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
So
Yeah, but I mean, the Spirit does speak through us,
yeah,
and can take them
yeah,
to the next step in their belief, whatever that might be.
And we receive
clarify
power to
things.
be his witnesses.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And it's
yeah.
the power of the Spirit working through us. I think
Yeah.
you're right, Max. I mean, to begin a discipleship relationship with someone where they're
Yeah.
on the journey towards Jesus and then, cross the line of faith, you do need ultimately to get them in the Word.
Yeah.
I think it's creating the kind of relationship with someone where you begin to talk about things that actually matter. So,
Well, that's it. Yeah.
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 and not just the periphery of life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And some people appreciate that.
Some people are starving for it.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm always praying is God, show me the people that you're drawing
Yeah.
and the people that are hungry for more.
Yeah.
Who are dissatisfied with life.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
No, it's good. Well, there's some good thoughts on boldness. Shall we move on?
Yes. Let us move on.
Let's shall.
Let's shall. Luke 23, starting in verse 1, then the whole company of them arose and brought him before Pilate, and they began to accuse him, saying, we found this man misleading our nation and forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar, and saying that he himself is Christ a king. And Pilate asked him, are you the king of the Jews? And he answered him, you have said so. Then Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowds, I find no guilt in this man. But they were urgent, saying, he stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, from Galilee even to this place. When Pilate heard this, he asked whether the man was a Galilean. And when he learned that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him over to Herod, who was himself in Jerusalem at that time. When Herod saw Jesus, he was very glad, for he had long desired to see him, because he had heard about him, and he was hoping to see some sign done by him. So he questioned him at some length, but he made no answer. The chief priests and the scribes stood by, vehemently accusing him, and Herod with his soldiers treated him with contempt and mocked him. Then, arraying him in splendid clothing, he sent him back to Pilate. And Herod and Pilate became friends with each other that very day, for before this they had been at enmity with each other. Pilate then called together the chief priests and the rulers and the people and said to them, you brought to me this man as one who was misleading the people. And after examining him before you, behold, I did not find this man guilty of any of your charges against him. Neither did Herod, for he sent him back to us. Look, nothing deserving death has been done by him. I will therefore punish him and release him. But they all cried out together, away with this man, and release to us Barabbas, a man who had been thrown into prison for an insurrection started in the city and for murder. Pilate addressed them once more, desiring to release Jesus. But they kept shouting, crucify him, crucify him. A third time he said to them, why? What evil has he done? I have found in him no guilt deserving death. I will therefore punish him and release him. But they were urgent, demanding with loud cries that he should be crucified, and their voices prevailed. So Pilate decided that their demand should be granted. He released the man who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, for whom they asked, but he delivered Jesus over to their will. You have a litany of injustices here. Greg talked about cutting corners in this passage, the compromises that each party has to make to send Jesus to his death, which I thought was an interesting take on it. What did you guys think?
I think this is definitely a picture of a government official who cannot get out of something he wants to get out of, and he is looking for because 3 times in this passage, Pilate says, "I find no guilt in this man," and so first time they present their evidence, he says he's not guilty. There's nothing here, and so but then he finds out he's from Galilee. He says, okay, here's a way I can get out of this, rather than just making a decision there and say we're done, go home. If there's not going to do it, he says, I'll send him over to Herod and let Herod question him, and but Herod doesn't find him guilty, and everything. So then Pilate says the same thing. Herod didn't find him guilty. I didn't find any guilt in him, so I'll punish him. And so he's kind of raising before it wasn't I'll punish him, but now I'll punish him.
Yeah.
I'll give the crowd a little bit
yeah.
a little bit of their bloodthirst, but then release him, because he's not done anything worthy of death. And the third time, verse 22, why? What evil has this man done? I find in him no guilt demanding death. I will therefore punish him and release him. So he sticks to his guns until the crowd really becomes insistent,
Yeah.
which is a pretty amazing thing that the Pharisees or the religious rulers were able to get this crowd so wound up that they would just call for his. Yeah, so it's a man who's on meaning Pilate. Pilate is on the hot seat, and everything he tries to get out of, and they won't allow him.
And I think it's a great picture of why cutting corners or making little compromises doesn't work.
Yeah,
Because Pilate knows from the jump the right thing to do.
yeah,
The right thing to do is to acquit him.
yeah,
That's his job. He makes the right determination, and he knows it, and he tells everyone that he knows it. And yet, he tries to smooth over the hard decision
Yeah.
in all of these ways. Maybe I'll entertain bad arguments just to help them feel heard.
yeah,
Maybe, oh, you know what? Because he's part of the jurisdiction of Galilee, even though I don't like Herod, I can kind of punt to Herod on this. And then maybe if Herod and I agree together, which Herod clearly does, you know, he
Yeah.
mocks him and says, "Look at your king, here he
Yeah,
is." You
yeah,
know, like
yeah.
clearly, you guys are crazy for thinking this guy's a threat.
yeah, yeah,
And you kind of get this sense that Pilate and Herod have a built-in compassion for each other. Like they kind of know what it's like to be in the annoying position of having to make rulings when
Yeah.
people are bringing stupid charges. You
Yeah.
know, like
especially the Jews.
especially the Jews who just keep hassling us with these
Yeah, and have all these rules,
all
and
these
this-
rules and all these things,
Yeah.
and so they become friends that day. And then the sense, okay, I'll punish him a little bit, you know. Okay, I'll what about Barabbas? You know, what about, and so it's just this string of concessions trying to placate evil.
Yeah, yeah,
And evil cannot be placated.
yeah, yeah,
And he cannot shirk the responsibility. At some point, he's got to decide either I will do it or I don't.
yeah,
And it just shows how continually compromising to evil eventually leads to a complete concession to it.
yeah, yeah. I read a novel years and years ago called Pontius Pilate,
Mhm.
and it was a historical novel, but the guy made the point that Pilate's sponsor had been a guy named Sejanus, who was Claudius's right hand man, and but he had gotten accused and convicted of plotting against the emperor, and so he was killed. And so the last thing Pilate wanted to do was get the emperor's attention to remember, oh yeah, Pilate. Pilate.
was
Why is
Sejanus.
Pilate? Why did I put Pilate in that position? Oh yeah, he's one of Sejanus's boys. And so he is trying to keep the lid on this very rebellious province
Yes.
and keep things quiet. So he really is. It is his personal survival that he's concerned
It's
about.
the
here.
classic middle management problem.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah, well, in which case puts him in the same boat as Peter
Mhm.
because he's
Mhm.
trying to save his skin in this.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. That's it. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, but it's this impossible game we play when we try to look diplomatic and reasonable
Yeah.
and get people to come to our conclusion without just saying what our conclusion
Yeah.
is
Yeah. Yeah.
and avoid the hard decision
Yeah.
that's going to be unpopular.
Yeah.
And obviously it's a risk for Pilate too, because if this thing goes up the chain of command, this was a notoriously difficult part of the empire to control because
Yeah.
the Jews were a fiercely independent people.
Well, I mean, what about Barabbas? I mean, it seems like he would be more of a troublemaker set loose than Jesus would in terms of just political instability. So, I mean, obviously we don't know anything about that, but I mean, that could just turn around and bite him too.
Yeah.
Well, better release a murderer than to have a whole crowd rioting against
Yeah.
him.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. No, if you have the government of the Jews on your case, you're not going to last real long from the pragmatic Roman perspective.
Yeah.
And all they have to do is petition Caesar and start getting his ear, saying
Yeah.
that this guy's incompetent.
Yeah.
He doesn't respect our traditions or honor us. And
Yeah. Exactly.
then, and so it's important to put ourselves in Pilate's shoes here to
Oh, yeah.
understand the kind of the impossible situation that he's in.
Yeah.
Not to excuse him, but so that we can relate to him. And so I was just trying to think through what are the positions we're in where we try to cut corners. We try to shirk responsibility rather than make the hard decision.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what would you say? Where are the biggest temptations of this for you guys?
I think it's just having hard conversations with people,
Mm-hmm.
like knowing there's a conflict and you have to actually go in there and deal with a conflict and listen, spend the time, say the hard things that need to be said, hurt people's feelings possibly
Mm-hmm.
by being honest. Yeah, no, but it's never fun. Those, to push those and push those to the side.
Yeah.
That's probably the biggest one for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember when we read Five Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni, one of the character in the story, right? One of the things she says is um, she differentiates between true speech and she calls it political speech in it, but it's essentially speaking for the effect versus speaking what you know to be true or are convinced. And I think often I fall prey to being so concerned with how things will land that I say things for the effect I hope they have on the person rather than focusing on, is this true? Now, I don't think kindness and truth are opposed. I think you
Yeah.
can be kind and true, but there's a kind of flattery or manipulation that can come in because you're so concerned with wooing the person over to your position rather than what do they need to understand?
Yeah.
What am I trying to communicate that they need to understand? And then being very hands off with outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because whenever I'm trying to ensure an outcome is when I'm most likely to manipulate or flatter with my speech or do these other things.
Yeah.
Or shirk responsibility.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things about outcomes, and this happened in a conflict resolution, and John, you were a part of it, and the thing that you said was, what would be the desired outcome of this?
Mm-hmm.
And I loved that because it enabled me to at least express what I thought would be what I desired to see, what resolution would look like, and then I was able to speak that. And then it just opened up the ability to speak a lot of the other things that needed to be said
Yeah.
within the context of that
Mhm.
conflict. So it's not necessarily trying to manipulate the outcome, but at least stating the desired outcome and just being honest about where you're in that position was really helpful.
I think another thing that comes out of this is that often it's in positions of authority where we're tempted to cut corners.
Oh,
Yeah.
That when we are entrusted with some power, everybody thinks they want power till they have to make the hard decision as the person in power, and they either get the credit or the blame for making that decision. It's
Yeah.
very tempting to, well, what does the crowd think? What's the consensus on this? Or what do we, let's do more, temperature taking to see how everyone feels, and you kind of go through this endless process of trying to see, really just read the weather and rather than look.
Yeah.
Here's the situation we're dealing with. Here's what we're going to do. Here's why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then move forward.
Yeah.
And you have to get to that point as a leader. I think of it in parenting. If I know there's an issue with my kid and my wife's concerned about it, the temptation is just to, okay, well, you're going to talk to her about that, or you're going to talk to him about that, and just sort of think, oh, well, they dealt with it, versus no, I'm their parent.
Yeah.
It's my issue. I need to sit down and talk through this with them too.
Yeah.
And if it's
both of your issues.
it's
I mean,
both
you
of our
can't-
issues,
yeah.
but ultimately, as the dad, they need to hear my authoritative voice speak into this
Yeah.
too, and
Yeah.
and that carries weight, and it needs to be said. And I'm not just going to punt to mom being the hammer on these different issues.
Yeah.
I'm going to sit down. I'm going to explain why we are doing this, and why we're going to follow through, even though it's unpleasant.
Yeah.
Rather than, or if there's an issue that I need to resolve with her, talk through, hey, we need to get on the same page on how are we going to address this, rather than just kind of letting it float in the world of, oh, this is her issue, that her thing to be concerned about with them. No, we're a team. I think that's a way that you can shirk position in the home.
Yeah.
You saying that also reminds me of not throwing her under the bus. Saying, hey, your mom is upset about this. It's like both. We are upset. Whatever her concerns are your concerns as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad that Luke. Well, I think all the gospel writers, but Luke especially, put this in to the history.
Yeah.
Because it first of all, it helped just that you can't write off the Romans as they're just cruel men, and that's what happened here. It's just the guy's trying to get out of a hard decision, tough decision for him.
Yeah.
And a decision all of us as human beings have been in or will be in, and can make the same mistake. So I'm glad that's in there. And also it's just, it makes him an everyman
Absolutely.
rather than the great villain of the story.
No. Absolutely. And it's just, it's so ironic that the one holding the most power in the situation seems the most powerless.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's often the situation we find ourselves in when we're in power or authority, is it just comes with great responsibility. And so you have to suffer for the decision you make more
Yeah,
because you're the one entrusted with making it.
yeah,
And there's always a temptation to shrink back from
Yeah.
that, or to paint it in a certain light that, well, this is kind of what people wanted, so we decided to do this, or we couldn't do this because of this or this, rather than to have ownership of what
Yeah.
you do,
yeah,
and to say, look, we thought this was right at the time, we made the wrong decision,
yeah,
or we still think it's the right decision. I know it was unpopular, but we were convinced, and we
Yeah.
still are.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, the only thing that Pilate really decided was what the sign would say over the cross.
yeah.
I mean,
so ironic.
It's because they just kept, he put the King of the Jews. And so they came back to him. They weren't satisfied. No, say he said he was the King of the Jews. And Pilate's very brave there. He says, what I've written, I've written.
Yeah.
That's the only thing he decided in this whole thing.
Right.
Yeah,
and then the greatest irony that Jesus gets killed for being who he is.
yeah,
Yeah.
That
yeah.
and the one who refused to save himself, the true King of the Jews.
Yeah.
So cool. Well, good thoughts, guys. Thank you, listeners, for trudging with us through Luke. I hope it's been enjoyable. It's been fun for us to just think through a gospel together. We'll talk to you again soon.